Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is season 6, episode 18. My name's Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. Hope everyone had a quiet, or at least a manageable holiday. It's now the end of December 2022. I'm also wishing everyone an incredible 2023 coming up. This week I'm bringing you an amazing conversation I had with Brian, a private practice therapist in New Jersey. This is a good one for the holiday period because we talk about the catastrophic effect miso can have on families. I actually learn a ton in this conversation because we talk about things like alexithymia, which is the difficulty of describing and expressing our own emotions, something I know many of us are very well aware of. We talk about tactile triggers, unwanted arousal, how the stress of miso might even affect our bowel movements. This is a wide-ranging and eye-opening conversation. We even talk about one incident where he physically attacks a friend at school growing up. As always, let me know what you think. You can reach out by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or find me on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. By the way, if you get a chance, please leave a quick review or rating wherever you listen to this show, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or elsewhere. It really helps reach more listeners. Thanks for the incredible ongoing support of Patreon supporters. If you feel like contributing, you can read all about the various levels and how to contribute at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. All right, without further ado, here is my conversation with Brian. Brian, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here.
Hey, Deal, how's it going? Nice to be here.
Yeah. So, you just said you've heard a lot of episodes. I always ask at the beginning, like, kind of whereabouts are you located?
I'm located in central New Jersey.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
I just had a couple. You probably heard I had a couple New Jersey episodes earlier this fall. So, really interesting stuff going on. So I guess what do you do?
I am a private practice therapist. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I started my private practice about little over 3 years ago, just before the pandemic started.
Okay, gotcha. And you also have misophonia as well, right?
Absolutely, lifelong.
Yeah, lifelong. Okay. So I guess I've had a couple. As you probably heard, I've had some therapists who also have misophonia come on the show, and there's so many things we could talk about. But I guess in these cases, I found that maybe just kind of going chronological is best to kind of cover everything.
Sure.
If that works for you, and we can kind of we'll just start kind of at the beginning, lifelong. So how far back? Like when did you first kind of notice?
Well, I kind of preface this usually by saying, like, I don't remember a time that this wasn't a thing. I don't remember not having triggers. I don't remember a comfortable family meal. So with that being said, I don't have a lot of clear memories, of a lot of my childhood. I have these little clear moments, these very crystal clear moments, but I can't remember like swaths of time or spreads, but I would imagine that it started becoming an issue for the family, not just for me, probably around the same time as most people, like 7 to 8, somewhere in that range. I actually remember a family vacation to the beach where it really stands out in my memory of childhood as being like, this was the first time that this became an issue, and I sort of remember being identified as problematic,
by your family.
Yeah, like it was like, oh, Brian's temper, right?
Yeah. What do you remember? What happened? Was it being in the car, or was it just kind of like just being around the family?
It might have just been a combination. What I remember most about that is that my mom would take me for walks at night to kind of like chill and cool out. I'm not exactly sure where the triggers were. Again, like those memories are spotty. I do remember that there was a popular Paula Abdul album at the time. Like that's, again, like my relationship with sounds is very intimate and interesting. So I remember my life chronologically more based on what music was playing at the time, what was popular. So I remember that. I remember my mom taking me out for walks to kind of cool off. I think it
After the
was
triggers, or was it just a general
I
kind of
think at the
thing?
end of the day, because I think
Yeah.
probably at the end of the day, we were in the hotel room, we were no longer going out and doing things, and probably my ability to distract or whatever from triggers during the day had waned.
Mm.
And probably I was tired, and but again, I can't really say particularly. I'd have to like call my parents into that conversation, and their memory might be kind of spotty as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, speaking of that, I mean, this might be jumping forward, but is calling your parents and talking about this stuff like a possibility? Like, are you still close? But did this have an effect long term?
Yeah,
And yeah.
absolutely. So it's affected. I mean, it's affected my family relationships catastrophically, and I mean that from a sense of like intensity level.
Hmm.
I have good relationships with most of my family, but that is largely in part these days because I keep my distance a
Hmm.
lot. I actually, prior to scheduling this appointment, I had put it off for a very long time because I was kind of nervous about the intimacy and the
Hmm.
personal nature of all of this and how these things can be perceived by people who don't have misophonia, my family, friends, etc.
Hmm.
But I actually let them know, hey, there's this podcast. I've mentioned it to them since simply because it's been so helpful to me to listen to episodes of this podcast, but I did let them know, like, hey, I'm going to do this show. I'm going to talk about family. I'm going to talk about you guys. It's not personal, it's about misophonia. And they were all supportive. They were kind of excited about the idea of me doing it. And my father actually said, well, would you ever want us to like listen to this? And I said, probably yes. I think you would probably learn a couple things. It's really hard to talk about it. um, it's really hard for me to talk about it and make any sense, um, and not get overwhelmed just by talking about it. And it's very hard for I've noticed. I don't know if anybody else or you have this same experience, but it's very hard for people to hear about it. It's very hard for people to not get overwhelmed. You know, if the conversation is about, hey, like I have this thing and it affects me in these ways and always has, and you are a part of what triggers that. I think there's a lot of defensiveness on all sides of those conversations. So I said, I look at it as an opportunity for me to reach an audience that I think needs to hear things like this, and I have benefited so much personally, but also for people in my life who I have not talked about it too much or have struggled to talk about it. I think it could be really eye opening for them to hear me talk about it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And this is kind of, and to any of those people any of those people you mentioned who are listening, I mean, this has come up in conversations on and off the podcast for me, especially recently. It's like, it's not about parent shaming or anything like that. It is very easy to get defensive, but it's hard to believe sometimes, but we really honestly don't blame the people
right.
who are caused unless they do it on purpose. So that there are cases, there have been cases
Mm-hmm.
like that, but we do try to assume best intent in a trigger. Our brains go in weird places, yes,
Yes.
but outside of that, it's yeah, there we understand, we're able to rationalize it, but it
Yeah.
is hard. We understand, and we also understand that it is hard to see from the other point of view, and that obviously, like you said, it makes it very difficult
Absolutely.
to talk about. Because honestly, and the last thing I'll say is, we generally, I mean, I do the podcast, but we generally don't want to talk about this funny outside. We just want to get on with our lives, and
Right.
so it's hard to find a good time to discuss it.
Yeah. The Especially at this point in my life, like I have really built up my ability to separate the triggers from the people who trigger me, from my feelings about them, from how I think about them. That's a lot of layers of complexity, but I think most people who have misophonia will understand what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
But it doesn't make it any easier a lot of the time to talk about it. Um, and that's the when I was as I started to think about this through a lens of trauma, through my work and also just my studying professionally and personally in sort of therapy, psychology, learning about trauma and the concept of alexithymia, which is like the inability to form words for feelings and thoughts when you're in a sort of fight, flight, freeze, trauma response state. Even though I want to talk about it with people, it's always still very hard because it immediately becomes overwhelming.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that term, but I've been looking for something to describe like why me who, I talked to some people about
Right,
misophonia who have
especially.
misophonia. In a moment, I can't explain it.
Yeah,
Or I can't, or I'm trying to find words to make it not sound, crazy.
there's a
But
word for that.
yeah, interesting. I thought
It
stuff. Maybe I just need to, uh, yeah, look it up more, or just kind of maybe write it down. And so
Well,
I
it's
have,
tricky. It's tricky
yeah,
because you're not going to find it in just a Google search. Like nobody's going to,
mm,
I mean, maybe maybe I should write an article or something. Although that's not really my strong suit in terms of how I write. I'm more of a sort of creative fictional writer when I write, but I do think that I made the connection for myself when I was reading "The Body Keeps the Score," which is I don't know if I can mention names of titles or whatever, but
Oh,
when that
I've mentioned on this podcast. I love
okay,
that
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
book.
yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't
I'm
finished it yet, but yeah,
I'm
go on.
currently in the middle of "The Body Remembers," which is something that you brought up.
I've got that on
Um,
my desk right now. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
so but when I heard alexithymia and he explained it, I was like, wow, like uh, this explains why I. It's not even like I can't talk about it. Once I get to a place of feeling safe and self-regulated, I can talk about it. But in that moment of trying to talk about it, particularly if you're met with any sort of apathy or perceived apathy, I don't mean that in a
Right.
literal sense, but or defensiveness, God forbid, it's over. It's done. My ability to form my emotions and thoughts into words is completely hijacked by my
Mm-hmm.
hyperactive central nervous system. And there's a word for that. And I think that's
Yeah.
amazing. It was really
Yeah.
helpful to me when I found that word to finally understand, like, oh, it's not just me. It's this whole concept.
Absolutely not. No, you're describing something that we all have felt, but we just thought we were the only ones, or that there was something wrong with us, which is, you know, just piles on to the shame and guilt that we all feel.
Right.
Um, okay. Wow. A lot of interesting stuff that we'll double down into, but maybe you just kind of like rounding out kind of your childhood experience. You how I guess do you want to I don't know, do you want to get into you mentioned a little bit about I'm assuming like kind of or maybe not like kind of small t trauma, like what was there, were there things happening around your childhood that you feel like were kind of difficult as well
I
that kind of
mean,
were
not really. I really, in terms of like looking at this through a trauma lens, I don't have any like traumatic events.
hmm
There was
hmm
no abuse. There was nothing like that. So it was really kind of difficult for me to conceive of it in this way. But once I started to read some literature and start to understand through, professionally in my grad school training um, about trauma and how it functions, really the thing that I look at as traumatic about my childhood is my experience of misophonia. And
hmm
it was a constant presence, like so many people that I've heard on here and have read about. It started with my dad. You know,
yep
my father is just one of these, and I think you've used this term before, but he's a dad sounds kind of like he makes dad noises. Just it's a constant thing. There's no being around him without knowing that he's there because he's making some sort of breathing,
yes
mouth, all these kinds of things. And so I used to eat. This is maybe the best way for me to illustrate this. For years, I can't even tell you how long at the dinner table because we would eat as a family every night at the dinner table in the kitchen. My parents were, I don't know why we did it. I think just to have a distraction, but we had a TV that was right next to me on my right side, and we would watch
hmm
TV while we were eating dinner. That might have evolved as a part of me being dysregulated during dinner. I'm not really sure. Again, I don't remember exactly how that happened, but I would eat with my left hand like shoved inside of my ear as if I was
hmm
like supporting my head with my hand, as if that was some sort of way to hide that I was desperately trying to stop the sound from my father, who was sitting directly to my left,
Mm-hmm.
from getting in there. And I did that for I can't even tell you how long, until I probably started deciding, like, I don't have to eat at the dinner table. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Did your anybody notice your
I
reaction?
can't imagine. I can't imagine that it wasn't noticed. It certainly
Mm.
wasn't discussed.
Were
And
there
it's
other? Yeah. Sorry,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
go ahead, go ahead.
Well, were there other than that? Were there other? Did you ever lash out or something? Or
I'm certain that I
yeah,
did. I mean, there was
yeah,
probably a certain passive aggressive uh, hostility or aggression that I was just projecting, because my whole entire body was, tense and in
yeah.
pain and looking for a way out. So yeah, I have to imagine that I was a significantly unpleasant person
Did you
to.
run off after dinner, or did you just kind of like
Oh
take
yeah,
a cool
I would
down a little
shove
bit?
as I remember it now, not always obviously, but as I remember it, I would kind of shove food in my face and get get the heck out of there as quickly as I possibly could.
Yeah.
And yeah, it had to be noticed at all times. And I did sort of appropriate this image of myself as, like, oh well, Brian's just a, for lack of a better, like an a-hole, or Brian has an attitude, or Brian has a
Mm-hmm.
really bad temper, which, I still work through those internalized beliefs, but I've certainly gotten much better at understanding them, being aware of how they manifest in my life, because I don't really have, I'm probably one of the more down to earth people you'll meet outside of being triggered,
Right.
which unfortunately is kind of a constant thing.
It's a constant risk of turning into Mr. Hyde from
Basically,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
or the Incredible
yeah,
Hulk or
yeah, and
K2.
I mean, obviously, like, I think that I have a lot of really strong ways of hiding that, and I never ever wanted to show it. But thinking back on childhood, especially, like, it was, I can't imagine it wasn't abundantly clear that, like, something was going on.
Yeah, it's always interesting that I mean, yeah, most of us when we're children, we have no idea what it is. Obviously it was no label, but somehow we managed to identify that this is not good. We need to hide it.
Yes.
And that's kind of interesting to me that we develop our coping mechanisms and whatnot. I mean, there's other things that we get angry about, but for this one thing, I guess we either somehow know in the back of our mind that we shouldn't be showing this, or it's internalized
Hmm.
because we're told that it's some other problem or something, that we have a bad temper or whatnot. Did you have
Right.
siblings around that time? I'm curious
Yeah, yeah. I
now.
have an older
Yeah.
sister, who's, like, my best friend in the entire world. But again, she was on my right side, so
Hmm.
I was blocking my left side, and I mean, there's if there was anybody to block at the table, it was my father on my left.
Yeah.
He just, like, very much. How do I describe, like, that you just eat very loudly? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
and
just
clearing your throat, and
right.
taking
Right.
an in breath, and doing, what I compare to, like, in yoga they call an ujjayi breath, which is like sort of breathing under your breath. It's like that held exhale. I don't know
Yeah.
how else to
I know
describe it.
exactly what I know
Yeah, I
exactly
had
what
a
you're
feeling
talking
you
about.
might.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, like, I was shielding that with my left hand, sort of crammed into my ear in various different configurations. But
Yeah.
then that left my right side vulnerable, and my sister eats with her mouth closed, but I hear everything
Mm-hmm.
happening in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Even with the TV on, right?
oh,
Or
totally. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it was helpful. It was very helpful. Thank God for that TV. But I still, I mean, I can't. It's very hard for me to. It's very hard for me to be around her a lot of the time as well. Even if we're just sitting around watching a movie, I can always hear her breathing, and because once you start to develop triggers with somebody that you're constantly around, I have found that process doesn't just stop.
it's the point of no return. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
What about mom?
Mom actually has TMJ, so mom's
What is that?
so it's like a they it's like incorrectly and commonly referred to as like lockjaw,
Oh, okay.
but people who have it often their jaws kind of knock while they're eating.
Mm,
And
mm-hmm.
I would say that she's probably the last person that I developed triggers with because she sat on the opposite side of the table.
Mm.
But I have just as many with her now, and her, throat clearing, breathing, things like that. And again, I hesitate to talk about even triggers, um, but yeah.
Oh,
So
you mean just mentioning it? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think enough people have mentioned them as long as you're
yeah,
not
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
making
yeah.
the sounds.
I
But
know it's a
yeah,
feature of the show.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so her jaw kind of like knocks and makes like a clicking or a
Mm-hmm.
thudding noise. She also has like veneers on her teeth, so sometimes she like can make contact with silverware.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But she also, has like issues with her throat. She had surgery on her neck, so she's kind of regularly feeling the need to clear her throat. So
Mm.
there's all of these, my whole family. It's just a
I'm curious. Did that surgery and stuff happen did it happen later, or I'm curious if that happened maybe around the time
that
where you started to develop triggers.
that happened later. That happened in
Okay.
college. But there were there have always been like slowly developing
Yeah.
just these triggers.
And it looks, I mean, you mentioned, I think, in your note earlier that the visual triggers are also a big part of your life.
Oh
Did
yeah,
they develop around the same time, or as, later
that's
on,
kind
like
of
many
yeah,
of
that's
us?
kind of hard for me to place, because it took me long enough to become aware that like the auditory triggers were real and were a thing. And even once I did like really become aware of them, um, I didn't really accept them. I thought I was crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and I constantly worried about like going crazier, so to speak, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But so to really, I I didn't even know that they were a thing until much later. But I don't think that they were not affecting me. I can't see any of this. It's just as good as hearing it. And this is something that I think probably people in my life understand less because for some reason it's easier to talk about the auditory stuff, and it's hard enough for people to understand and accept.
Yeah.
So then if I turn around and say like, oh yeah, and by the way, like I can see
Yeah.
you across the room and it's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's just like a bridge too far. You know what I mean?
We know. We know. Yeah. Yeah. And we know that nobody else knows. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is that like I started to notice this when I was dating somebody for a long period of time. And obviously, triggers developed over time in that relationship. I started to notice that, like, it's a tactile thing as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
misokinesia is all about like various different kinds of movement. So, if I
Mm-hmm.
can feel someone breathing, it's just the
Yep.
same. It's not a different reaction at all. It's as if I'm hearing it. It's as if I'm seeing it. I don't have to be able to hear it or see it. So um, when I was in this relationship, obviously, in the beginning it was fine, but very quickly I started to wear earplugs,
Yep.
which is something that I would like to go a little bit more in detail
Yeah. Yeah.
on.
Yeah. We'll get into the coping
Um,
mechanisms for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I started to notice that like if I'm like Big Spoon and I can feel the rise and fall of your breath, like I I tense up. It's all the same. It's all the exact same responses. So that cuddling is a limited proposition
Mm-hmm.
for me. I
Mm-hmm.
I crave that contact and that tenderness and all of that, but like at the same time, there's a hard limit to it most of the time because eventually it becomes triggering.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And this is something I'll just jump in with my kind of interpretations. And I've mentioned this on some recent episodes that I maybe have not been, yeah, broadcast yet, but but it just got me thinking that, I think like sound is like it's almost the hardest sense to kind of hide away from because it's like,
Right.
you can close your eyes, right? You can not put something in your mouth to taste it, or you can not touch something, but it's almost like, if misophonia is kind of a canary to a larger, your brain trying to warn you of
Mm-hmm.
danger, it seems to make sense to me that being extra sensitive to sound first would come first,
Sure.
and then the visuals, and then touching. So I feel like maybe in the future we'll find that this misophonia is it's I think it'll be I think we're seeing signs that it is far greater than just a
Oh
sound thing.
yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. The it's so interesting because like I think of it as just when I describe it to people, I don't start by saying I have this thing called misophonia. I start by saying like I have this sensory sensitivity thing, because for me I'm not just sensitive to all those things too. I'm very sensitive to like everything about my environment. So as I
Like
started to
HSP kind of stuff, or you think, or
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, absolutely. Since I started learning more and
highly
trying.
sensitive person for those who don't know. But yes, continue.
Right. Yes. Exactly. So like I can smell things that other people don't smell around us. Like
Mm,
I hear everything. So that there's no limit to that. Like the guy who idles his car outside of the wall of my
mm,
bedroom for like 2 hours every night, that is triggering to me. Like I feel it. I feel him out there.
mm-hmm.
But smells, the lighting in a space.
Are you one of those people? Sorry, I don't know if you heard. There was a friend of mine came on, and he's like, I can, I can tell. Like, my friends know that I can tell if a TV is on in somebody's house because it's got that high pitched sound. And I
So
was like, I thought I was the only one.
yeah. So I actually don't have that, and I I,
Okay,
I
yeah.
believe that there's a genetic component to that feature.
Mm,
I had
mm.
a there was a woman in a class of mine in college who could always hear it and would ask the professor to turn off the TV. And I
Yeah,
remember thinking even back then, like, thank God I can't hear that because
right.
it's bad enough,
Yeah.
But one thing that I can perceive is the very fast flicker of LED lights. Um,
Mm.
Most
Yep.
people don't even realize that LED lights have this like almost
Especially on a dimmer.
imperceptible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. So I've noticed recently in driving, which I don't do too much of anymore because I work from home, um, that I constantly think that there's an emergency vehicle behind me, and then I go and look and I realize, oh no, it's just these obnoxious LED lights
Yeah.
because the I don't see the flicker direct when I'm looking straight on, but in my periphery, like there is this. It's very much pulsating.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a flicker, and I've actually, yeah, because I'm an engineer, I've actually programmed a lot of those in the past, so I know exactly
Amazing.
how those work, and I've seen them go wrong, so which is even more annoying. But yeah, we spent a lot of time trying to smooth that out, but yeah,
Yeah,
to
it makes me dizzy. Like when people have Christmas lights that are LEDs, it makes me dizzy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, no, these are just excellent. Going back to, well, then maybe how about like around school and friends as you were growing up?
Yeah, again, like these are things that I don't really remember. Like,
Mhm,
I don't know how I got through some of these times. Like, I don't know how I got through living with roommates in college for the first 2 years.
mhm, mhm.
Year 3 and 4, I had my own room in like an on-campus apartment.
Yeah,
Um, but the first 2 years, I slept in a room with somebody, and the first year in particular, that person like would like talk to himself in his sleep and like I honestly don't know how I got through some of that because back then we didn't really have earbuds. We had those like over ear little like
big foam,
those
big foam,
foam
kind of over the
spoons
ear.
that you
Yeah,
would
yeah,
put over your ears. And obviously I kept them by my bedside at all times. I do think that there has been an intensification over the years, and maybe even particularly within the last 10 years of all of this for me, um, which is going to go back to the earplug conversation, um, but I think that I think that this can, and for a lot of people, as I've heard on the show and just in general looking into the community and hearing stories, it does seem like a lot of people do experience an intensification over the years, gradual kind of continuous.
Absolutely.
Some people seem
Mm.
to have the opposite experience, but like I do think there are a lot of people who have mirrored my own experience, which is this just keeps getting more and more layered and intense.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, your experience of like not like it kind of like not noticing it so much or not remembering it so much around those college years, at least, the years when we are basically kind of like first out of our house and away from our initial most
Yeah.
intense triggers. There seems to be I don't want to say a lull, or at
Well,
least,
that's a really good point. Like, it was like finally, thank God, I'm out
yeah,
of that.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and that, that still holds true, whenever I get like a respite from a certain environment. It's like nothing can hurt me right now.
Yeah, yeah, like Superman, or yeah, um, yeah. No, that's what was I gonna say? Yeah, yeah, that's very much the case, and then yeah, since I guess at least for me, yeah, the mid 2000s, it started to just intensify as I got
Yeah.
into the workforce and you start
Yep.
to work in open offices or
Mm,
have to have lunch with your coworkers and whatnot.
right.
But okay, so yeah, you had friends. They Who knows what they noticed because
Right.
you
Who knows?
weren't really noticing it. Although, are you still friends with some of these people from that
Oh yeah,
time? Do
I have a
they?
lot of
Yeah,
I have a lot of friends from all different, sort of
epochs. Yeah.
yeah, epics of my life, exactly. And it's interesting. Like I can think of one instance where something that my best friend in high school was doing was just irritating me to no end. And we were at like a sort of, I think it was like a New Year's Eve like sleepover with like mixed company, and but everybody was kind of scattered around, and my one friend just kept doing this one thing that was triggering me. Now I know. I didn't know then. I had no idea.
Mm,
I was just filled with rage. And I actually like this was maybe the one time that I got like legitimately physical, and I kind of like attacked him,
yeah.
and was like, "Stop doing that, or I'm going to do something more than this." Like I kind of threatened him,
Yeah.
and I'm like just remembering this as we're talking. So yeah, there were those incidences, which is why when I look back on it and I'm like, how did that guy, meaning me, how did that guy get through these experiences? Like, how did I function in a classroom being triggered? And I know that I was. I just don't have like, again, this is how like trauma functions, that like we remember things with a stunning clarity, but then other things, it's
Mhm.
gone. Like I have no access to it. I'm not really sure how I got through some of these times, but I did.
Did Yeah. During these times, were you ever, and you don't have to like get in specifics, but were you ever diagnosed for anything, any comorbidities? Did you get misdiagnosed where maybe you had somebody,
No,
I don't know.
I, I mean, I think I had significant ADHD. Like, I couldn't sit and do anything, ever. I think part of that, especially like when we're talking, like, I'm very musical, but I'm not very good at playing musical instruments. My voice is my main instrument, and I try
Mm,
my hardest to get better at other instruments. Like, I took piano lessons for 8 years, but I never ever practiced. Part of that, I think, just ADHD. Part of that, I think, also like I had to sit in the living room and be triggered. I also, there's this
yeah.
interesting dynamic of like not, you know, having such an intense reaction to hearing other people, and not wanting to hear other people kind of gave me this strong aversion to being heard, if that makes any sense. Like, I, even now, like I don't like to practice where people can hear me. I don't. There's this weird thing about being heard, and I think that that comes from just childhood of not wanting to hear other people. So I kind of never wanted to be doing the thing that I didn't want other people to do. So I have a lot of kind of like internalized patterns and thoughts and feelings and beliefs around being heard, if that makes any sense.
Dude, you're blowing my mind. You just described something that I've never heard anyone else describe. This is like, I don't know how many episodes of this podcast, but wow, yes. I yeah, I just thought, yeah, I don't know what to say because yeah, I understand there are situations when even when I try to practice piano, like I don't
Yeah.
really want to play it out loud because I just don't want the attention. I just thought it was because I don't want the attention on me,
Yeah.
or I don't want to disturb what other people are doing. Sometimes I will, but I'm always thinking in the back of my mind,
Same.
is this too loud, or is this
Totally.
are people going to comment on, like, I don't even want people to say, "Oh, that's nice." Like, it's just weird.
Right.
I just kind of want to be in my own bubble.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
because my mom would always walk by and say like, "Oh, that sounds so nice," and I'd be like, don't say anything.
oh God, does it
Don't
work
don't
for this too?
acknowledge me here. Pretend like I'm not here.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I just assumed it was something completely. I mean, it might be something completely unrelated, but I feel like maybe we have some.
I had
I don't
imagined that
know.
that's a multifaceted thing and a multi-layered thing, but
Hmm.
it's hard for me at this point to separate it from the idea of like I didn't want to be the thing that I was so bothered and
Hmm.
disturbed and in pain because of, and I still don't. So I'm very careful. I eat with my mouth closed. I am aware of the volume of my breath. I'm constantly making
Yeah.
efforts to not be heard, and I don't think that ends at bodily sounds. I think that the way that, especially when we're younger, the way that we think about these things, of course it's going to extend into like just being heard, playing
Hmm.
instrument, talking, all these things. So it's interesting the way that affects everything.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about this because I think you're going to blow my mind probably on many things. So I just want to get to as many topics as possible. So then you decided to be. So did you decide to become a therapist kind of right away? I'm curious how that decision was made, or was that made during college?
Yeah,
Just yeah, maybe talk about career stuff.
I was real directionless. I
Hmm.
still kind of feel fairly direction. I mean, I have directions. I just like don't know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Um,
Again,
I
you're mirroring kind of my my
sure.
midlife crisis kind of
Right,
situation I'm right
exactly.
now.
Yeah, well, and I'm on the threshold of 40. I'm going to turn
Yeah.
40 next year. So that is what it is. But yeah, so I was directionless. I got an English degree in college because like reading and writing was the only thing that I thought I was ever good at. I didn't. I was very practical about my creative pursuits, and I just was like, I'm never going to be able to make that into anything, lucrative or
Financially,
successful.
but right. Yeah.
Which like I look back and think, why did I why did I bet against myself so much? But and I think again, like everything else, I think it's all intertwined in how I viewed myself and all of these things. But so I graduated with an English degree. I had no idea what to do with it. I was working with like the county recycling, riding on trucks and picking up barrels and dumping them into the truck. I wore earplugs on that job every single day because you're basically breaking glass directly in your face. So that was a whole
Interesting
like
choice. Yeah, yeah.
necessity of wearing earplugs, which was an interesting experience that whole time. So I just stayed at that job um, through the beginning of the fall, and it started to get very rainy and very cold, and I'm very sensitive to cold and all of
Mm,
that, obviously HSP. And a friend of mine just came up and said, hey, like I work for this nonprofit. We have this position that is like a mentor. You'd be a mentor for teenage adolescent boys, kind of working with them and their families. And I was like, yeah, sign me up for that. That sounds great. And I always had an idea that maybe I could be a therapist, or that I had a knack for talking to people and empathizing and understanding, even if I didn't understand, but like being able to kind of take that perspective. So that experience of being a mentor and working with these kids and their families really did kind of solidify like, oh, I not only do I like this, but like I'm actually very good at it. And I could maybe make this into something of a career.
hmm.
And that was 10 years ago. I decided to probably 10 or 12 years ago I decided to apply for grad school. And now 10 years after I graduated, I'm a privately practicing therapist.
Nice. Okay. Okay. And when you were starting out, were you dealing with just kind of any kind of cases? Where did you notice kind of hone it? Well, actually, maybe we should talk about like when did you When did you find out that misophonia was a thing, that it had a name?
So that happened in grad school. I had started to talk about it just a little bit
Mm.
here and there wherever I felt safe. But that was a very small pool. And one of those people was a very good friend of mine in grad school, who is still a very good friend of mine. If she ever listens to this, thank you so much, Mary. But she kind of took an interest. She got interested in what I was talking about and curious about it. And she went and kind of did a little bit of homework. And she came to me and she said, yeah, I figured it out. I figured out what this is, and there's a name for it. And
Mm.
what she said was hyperacusis.
Mm.
And so I immediately was like, oh my God, what? And I went and looked and I started reading, and immediately I was like, okay, I see why you identified this. Like, this is there are some attributes of this that make sense to me.
Yeah.
There's some overlap, but it is absolutely not on the nose.
Yeah.
But I took that cue and I went to the bottom of the page, the resources, and I started just clicking around. So there's like tinnitus or tinnitus, there's
Mm-hmm.
hyperacusis. There was another one that was, again, there were some features, but it didn't quite do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to misophonia. I just clicked a link to something, and even just the name, like I was like, let's see, what is this? And as soon as I started reading what they said, it just
Yeah.
started hitting every single box. And the box that was hit that really like tipped me off, that I was like, whoa, this is it. There is no way that this could be like, this could not be what I experienced, because I have never told anybody in my entire life about this. Was the presence of unwanted sexual arousal, as it is phrased, if you look it up.
Yeah.
That
So you mentioned this in your notes.
Yeah,
This hasn't come up that often in the show, but it's a thing. So I want to hear more about that. Yeah.
yeah. It's just I guess I I had never mentioned it, right? Like I had never
Mm-hmm.
opened my mouth and phrased that into a thing, but and I don't even know that I had ever really thought about it explicitly for myself. But I certainly knew that it was a thing. Like, this idea that like, even when I'm feeling like totally triggered and totally unsafe and awful, and sometimes there was this aspect of like, why is there blood flow happening? Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
that?
Mm-hmm.
Where is that
Mm-hmm.
coming from? Or like, there was this like these weird sensations that would come along with it. Again, unwanted. These were
Mm-hmm.
not like, I wasn't like, ooh, this feels nice. That didn't come along until I discovered ASMR. Uh, which again, like, there's a lot of like wire crossing and signal crossing in
Mm-hmm.
misophonia that I don't necessarily hear a ton of people talking too much about. But I think it's really like, it's really it's a really vast phenomenon. But yeah, so when I read that, I was just like, wow, not only am I not crazy, but other people have the most like shameful, embarrassing aspect of this shameful and embarrassing experience that I have.
Enough people that it's being written about.
Yeah,
You're following a link.
right.
Yeah.
And this was like 10, 11, 12 years ago. So, if we're still in the fledgling stages now, when I learned that there was a word for this, there was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There was like two resources online, about it.
And it
So
was called a selective sound sensitivity syndrome for a
yes,
while, as you
yes,
know, like
yes,
even before
exactly.
the New York Times article. But
Right,
yeah.
right. Um, so
Okay,
yeah,
so you found out it had a name, and
hmm
okay, yeah. So Mary, thank you, Mary, again, uh,
yes,
helped you identify it. Right? Then what happened? I mean, for a lot of us, obviously, you went down. I'm sure you went down the Google
yes,
rabbit hole.
absolutely. She
Um,
gave me some hope that I then like took and ran with it,
yeah.
and really figured it out quite quickly. I think it was, we were sitting in the student center where we would have lunch, and she said, "Hey, I think this might be it." And then I think within the next hour, we were still sitting there, and I was like, "That wasn't it, but here it is."
Oh, right. The hyperacoustics was not it, but yeah. Okay,
Right,
gotcha. Yeah.
right.
Amazing. Yeah, isn't it amazing how quickly you can do it? You don't have to go to the Alexandria Library in Egypt or something to find information anymore.
Yes, yes. Thank
Um,
goodness.
so then what? Then so at this point you were still in grad school. Okay. So did it change kind of how? Did you get more tools? Did it kind of change how you looked at misophonia? How you looked at yourself?
I mean, it immediately started changing how I looked at the experience of it.
Hmm.
It immediately started changing how I thought about myself. Obviously, these are lifelong, ongoing processes. There will never come a day, and this is something that I talk to my clients about, regardless of what they're dealing with. There's not likely to come a day that you don't deal with this stuff anymore, like whatever the stuff is, because that's the way our brains are built. There's no on and off switch. And we want to think that knowing something, whether it's a childhood trauma or the source of a point of pain in our life, we want to think that knowing that and understanding it is going to free us from it, but it doesn't. You know, I'm constantly telling my clients, like, you can have a really cathartic session, and you can leave here thinking, man, like, I can't believe I finally realized this. I can't believe I
Yeah.
finally remembered this, and you can feel amazing, and then you're going to go back to your life and you're going to do all the same crap that you've always done, because it's all about maintaining your awareness of these things and continually choosing the way that you interact, react, respond, etc. I don't really. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought in the middle of
No, no,
saying
no,
that.
no.
Um,
That's fine.
but yeah, it did immediately start changing everything, really, because finally I wasn't alone, and also finally I wasn't crazy. Like, this wasn't. I still was not thinking about it as like mental illness. There was still, I was still like, yeah, but doesn't this sound like a mental illness? But I really immediately started to repair that relationship that had me kind of in the back of my mind, just like quietly fearing that I was one day going to lose control. Does
Hmm.
if that makes sense? That really started to repair almost immediately.
Yeah, I think maybe it put what you were experiencing in the context of well, it's just good to know that it's other people have it and they haven't
Yes.
all gone in, completely over the edge.
Yes.
Like
Exactly.
people are living with it, people are finding tools to
Yes.
use to work with it.
Exactly.
Um, but yeah, actually, maybe we should just go back. So with to that one topic that doesn't come up that often, the unwanted sexual arousals. Like, did I mean you saw that written down, but were you able to kind of learn anything about it? Have you? Uh,
I you know
yeah, I don't know what you found out there, just for other people listening that might be experiencing stuff like that.
Not really. And again, like, I did try to look it up a little bit just today. I had all these lofty plans of like doing some real research to back some of this stuff up, but like, the best laid plans. Um,
Yeah,
so I haven't really done a ton of research into it. I don't know that it has been really researched very much. The
right.
the research focus on misophonia seems to have a very narrow focus. It's expanding, like that motor study.
Mm-hmm. The Kumar study. Yeah.
Yeah, the Kumar study. Just man, oh man, like, so much gratitude for that happening, because I think it starts to break those walls a little bit. That this is a multi-system, multi-layered, multifaceted thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But my experience of it was just in random situations, especially in like adolescence, young adulthood, you know, um, at school, like, boys we're kind of constantly nervous that like we're gonna suddenly,
Oh,
um,
right. Yeah.
like,
Be aroused
have
or
something we
yeah.
can't hide, like,
Right.
right when it's time to get up and get off the bus, or at the very end of class when the bell goes off. And what I know now is that, like, sometimes I would be triggered by a sound, and my response wouldn't be anger or uh, such like a sort of
Mm-hmm.
tense, but rather this, like, well, again, why am I experiencing blood flow? Like, where is this
Yeah.
coming from? And
And it's only like you said, only the physical side. It's not like you probably don't even notice that your body is doing that because
right,
you're not aroused.
yeah,
You're not actually psychologically aroused or anything. It's
yeah,
just
absolutely.
yeah.
It was just like my body is, and I did read something today that did say that it could be linked to like hormonal systems, but I didn't really have a lot of time to read too much into that, like that there could be some link between, I guess, that myelinated part of our brain, which is definitely in the sort of deeper brain, so it would make sense that it might be connected to all sorts of systems in our body.
There was, yeah. I mean, there was somebody came on. She said that she swears it's connected to her hormones because she's now, I think
Hmm.
menopausal, and it's just is
Right.
Misophonia is wreaking havoc, and it did back in the day, and
Right.
so. But there's probably
I
zero
actually, yeah,
studies on
I
this.
remember what you're talking about. I was listening
Yeah.
to that, and I was totally keyed in because I was like, yeah, of course, this makes sense, right?
Hmm.
This is, we're talking about all these sort of primitive survival parts of our brain, and the effects of these things are not, they can hardly be measured most of the time. Like, the
Hmm.
and again, I've always had stomach problems. I've always had, not again, I guess I'm just bringing this up now, but I've had intense kind of gastrointestinal issues my entire life. Um,
How so? Because I have too, but now you're blowing my mind again because I'm
right.
like,
Well,
I've had situations where I've had difficulty controlling my real talk, difficulty controlling my bowels like like early in childhood, but
yeah,
like later than
sure.
you would expect. Let's
Right.
just put it
Oh,
that
no, of
way.
course. Well, but if you think
And I
about
just
it,
thought maybe I'm lactose intolerant or something, but I
and
don't
that may
think
be the
so.
case,
Yeah.
and in my mind, like, and I don't want to sound conspiratorial here, but like that could be down to the fact that most of us started with our triggers at the family dinner table. Now, that's not a
Hmm.
global thing, but it does seem to
Right.
be incredibly common.
Hmm.
And what's the first thing to go when you're feeling under threat? When your survival system is aroused, the first thing to go is digestion. All of
Hmm.
that resource is pooled into your extremities so that you can fight, flee, or freeze up to make yourself safe. Um,
Hmm.
and so, like, this kid sitting here at dinner with his left hand buried into his eardrum, um, he's not digesting really great.
Hmm.
He's also like force feeding food into his face so that he can run away from the table really quick.
Right.
That's
Right.
not that is not helping that whole situation. Now, obviously, now I have some skills, and I understand the central nervous system. I understand sympathetic and versus parasympathetic, and I understand proprioception, and all these things that can help us to self-regulate a dysregulated nervous system. But back then, I was dysregulated for hours, days, maybe years. Like, I look at myself and I think I was constantly dysregulated.
Yeah. And I got when I learned about the vagus nerve valves, I thought, oh, brain connect as a connection from your brain to your gut, and that's probably has something to do with
Mm. Oh yeah.
maybe my digestion stuff. But I haven't really dug too deep into it. Um, let's talk about, yeah. We're getting, oh man,
I
we're gonna
know. I
have to be
know.
back for part two, three, four, five. We'll have to do a mini series here, um. But I do have to get to something
Yeah,
in the not
absolutely.
too distant future. But I would. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about, yeah, your take on the nervous system, and maybe how you, and maybe because I also want to maybe talk about what you maybe tell your clients. Maybe we can kind of like, I don't know, combine those together in
Yeah.
some way to get your thoughts there before we start to wind down.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to have my practice be like legitimately helpful to people. I want my clients to have a place where they can openly talk about whatever they need to talk about, but I don't want them to leave with just having talked about it. So I've always looked into and studied and sought out expertise and knowledge about the body, the central nervous system, all of these things. And so that's always been a part of what I've practiced, is to have awareness not only of your thoughts and feelings emotionally, but when I talk about practicing awareness of feelings, I always split it. That's a two-parter. That's your emotions, whatever sort of emotional experience you're having, but also what is going on in your body. Um, and because in this society we create this line between like our neck, and I would even say our, like, just our head, our skull, and the rest of our body, as if they're two
Mm-hmm.
different things, um, when in fact they're not separated at all. They are one in the same. They're not just connected, they are the same thing. And so I always wanted to give people not only cognitive skills but also like physical, um, sort of sensory and, um, body based things to help them get through stress, difficult moments, the sense of overwhelm. And I think my experience of misophonia and how physical it is has always informed that. um, just this past, I think it was in January or February, I was able to take Dr. Brout's uh, first course that she offered for adults for the, Regulate, Reason, Reassure protocol,
Mm-hmm.
which, like, I recommend very highly to everybody out there. Read up on it, seek her out, take the course if you can, if you have the resources. It took all these things that I had done with my clients for so long and gave me like a brand new lexicon of ways to describe it and language to use, which is so important in what I do, to have the right ways to describe this to all different kinds of people. But also, it gave me like a new practical sense of how to use it. For instance, like I'm sitting here talking to you, with my weighted blanket folded on my lap,
Mm-hmm.
just because it helps me to kind of feel that what we call deep pressure, which is a proprioceptive thing. Proprioceptive feedback stimulates our parasympathetic nervous system. This is getting into a little bit of jargon and details, but all of that is a good thing. It helps us to
Mm-hmm.
self-regulate. It reassures our central nervous system that we are in fact safe, and that helps us to do the cognitive work that we can't do when we're protecting and in
Right.
survival mode.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, yeah, and I'm going to. Dr. Brad's definitely a legend. I'm actually going to be talking to her again for
Oh,
her second time on the show. So she'll
I
be
look
coming.
forward to that very much.
Yeah, yeah.
She's a treasure.
No, that's great. Okay. Yeah, the nervous system. And honestly, that's something that it's just in the last year I've kind of been learning more about. And there's definitely, I think definitely a key there. When you're, and then yeah, these are all good things to work in. Are there any like when clients come to you, um, you know, you can do all this work on, well, basically, are these the kinds of tips that you tell them to do when they're out in the world? Like, is there a separation between like calming your nervous system down and maybe dealing with a trigger in the moment? Like, do you have tips for like how to deal with something as it's happening? That's because
Yeah.
that's another
So
question that comes up.
yeah, I mean, I think my thing is like I can sit and rattle off these techniques. My memory of things is not fantastic, so like I like as soon as I've learned something, it's kind of like flown out. Like I keep like kernels of it, but like listing off different techniques
Yeah.
is not my strength. But I also encourage. Sorry, excuse me. I also encourage people that, um, you know. Uh, it's individualized. So like what works for my central nervous system and what makes and resonates for me, what makes sense for me,
Mm-hmm.
is not necessarily going to be the same as anybody else. And it's important that I find the things that do work for me and that other people do as well. So I will give people as many techniques as I possibly can, with the hope that the message that I'm conveying is there are as many ways to do these things as there are, you know, thoughts in your head, grains of sand on the beach, etc. And I think it's important to have big things that you can do that take time and energy and maybe privacy to some extent. But I think they're also really important that you have little things that you can do that nobody will notice. Um, because
Mm-hmm.
I have to, like, when we're out, like I was just at a family dinner with my cousins, and the cousins group is a little less triggering than, everybody else. But it's still it's not triggering. This was also at an indoor restaurant, which I don't do I'm not comfortable. But it was, it was for my family. It was not about me. It was something that it was important to me that I go. So I'm trying to regulate my sort of pandemic anxiety about being in an indoor space. I'm
Yeah.
trying to navigate my overstimulation of being in that environment, which I don't really go into those environments anymore. And part
Mm-hmm.
of it is it's not just COVID anxiety. It's also, this is so much more overstimulating now than it was 2.5 years ago. Because I was
Mm-hmm.
used to it back then. And, now it's like the first like 20 minutes, I was really just staring at the menu. And I'm sure anyone who was
Yeah.
there is going to be like, oh, yeah, you were doing that for a reason. And it's like, yeah, kind of, because, I could just like kind of have a single point of focus as I allowed my mind and my body to kind of integrate all of these sounds. Not to mention, there were some triggering sounds because the bread was already on the table. My
Yeah.
people who trigger me were already doing these things. So we do have to find things that we can do even when we can't walk away. Walking away is always really wonderful way of kind of helping yourself and giving yourself an opportunity to self-regulate so that you can come back. But we don't always have that luxury. And even when we come back, sometimes we're right back in the thick of it, the danger of it. So it's important for me to be able to have those things, and it's important for me to convey to my clients, again, regardless of what they're presenting sort of difficulties or problems or issues are, that we've got to have like a whole host of things that we can use all of the time, not just when we have the time to draw a warm bath, because that probably is the best thing, right? Like, or whatever it is, that big thing, that, the weighted blanket that you can't bring to the restaurant with you, like,
Right.
it's,
Right.
to
Yeah,
have,
that's what I was getting at. I was like,
yeah,
I was imagining you. I mean, yeah, I'm sure that's great even here in my office. But yeah, you're right. There's got to be an array of
hmm,
different tools that we need to use in different situations. Sometimes it's popping in those noise canceling headphones.
right,
But other times at home, we can do things to kind of,
uh,
and maybe part of it is kind of before we go to that restaurant. Yeah, because I went to a restaurant last night too, and I was like, I'm still surprised at how, um, how trapped I feel, because
yeah,
it's part of it's also
yeah,
like I try to go to those restaurants where you order ahead, you pay beforehand, so you don't have to then
sure,
wait for the bill and then be
sure,
sitting there amongst triggers. So that's
yes.
another factor. But maybe just kind of like yeah, just prepping yourself mentally before you go out
Oh yeah, it's essential. It's
is
essential.
yeah.
And it's a whole thing. Like, I try to, it's almost like we're experiencing the discomfort preemptively in order
Hmm.
to start to pre-prep our nervous system to be in that place. Which is, again, it's labor that we do. It's labor that we have to do if we want to have these types of experiences,
Right.
interactions, etc. So I'm happy to do it, but it is definitely laborsome.
It's exhausting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
okay, Brian. I very, very, very reluctantly
I know I didn't even
to
get to the
close
whole thing
this.
about
Oh
the
my god.
earplugs and why they're a problem, but
Oh
it's
my
okay.
god.
It's
Okay.
totally okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna look at my schedule. Well, maybe this will be a cliffhanger, one of those old '80s season finale cliffhangers.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, listen,
it's not the end of a season,
I
but
know
well,
you are very busy these days because I made an appointment in your schedule and I know what that's looking like, and I'm so excited about it. But yeah, I mean, literally, if you would ever want to continue this conversation, I
yeah.
would be so happy to.
I'm going to be reaching out to you because you said the earplug thing, also the whole music and fiction writing. There's stuff I'm working on related to misophonia that I want to talk about.
Awesome.
So
Yeah, I mean, I could
yes,
talk. I've lived this my entire life. I could talk about it, and like I could literally
yep,
not, I could never talk about anything else and be perfectly fine.
yep. You once again you've described something that I could not articulate till now. So that's yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, I just had like almost a 2-hour call yesterday with somebody, and so
Wow.
it's Yeah, I think a
Yeah,
lot
but I
of us
mean,
are very
of
similar.
course, of course.
But we and that could have gone on forever too. And honestly, it was the first time I actually kind of almost felt exhausted because I was like, wow, we've covered a lot of
Wow.
stuff that
Yeah.
I want to talk about. And so sometimes when you do that, you kind of get
No, I
exhausted.
mean, listen, I appreciate you so much for doing this. Like, I can't tell you the impact that being able to listen to your show and so many different people who experience this, scientists who research it. I mean,
Hmm.
it's been a complete and total game changer for me.
Well, I appreciate hearing that. Yeah, and it's the stories of people like you that come on that kind of just make it special. Yeah, we'll be in touch. This has been
Yeah,
amazing
I'd
so far.
appreciate it. Yeah, yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you, Brian. This was such a joy, and I can't wait to talk more. If you liked listening to this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website misophoniapodcast.com. The easiest ways to just send a message on Instagram at misophoniapodcast. On Twitter, we're actually at Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting the Patreon at patreon.com/misophoniapodcast. The music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.